Friends, addictions. It is something that we often recoil against. It is so foreign for many of us who have grown up in a Christian home. When in 1999 I entered into Australia, my first assignment was to develop a program in response to the drug challenges in what was then the drug capital of Australia, Cabramatta. 42 drug-related murders took place on the streets in that first 2 months. It was a war zone. And there was a period of 2 years that I would say goodbye to my family in the morning, and I would be emotional. And my wife just wouldn't understand, because I never disclosed to her that my life was constantly threatened. In 2003, the Asian Mafia, the triads, would come one Thursday evening, 10 minutes before our closing time, and would hit our center, try and kill a client in our center, to try and take control through fear, instilling fear. But I guess I just instinctively reacted because of my military training, and a massive fight broke out. And that night I learned that angels could fight as well, because it is impossible for one man to hold 5 people at bay. Got that young man free, he fled, but I became the target. By the way, 3 years later, I'm invited to run a depression program in a church, and I can't tell you which church it was, but in my audience would be an Asian young man. And as I talk on the issue of loss and grief, and it's linked to depression, I also talk about the issue of trauma. And I share that story, what happened that night. And as I share that story, this young man, the blood just drained out of his face. I see it as I'm watching you, so I can see who's going to fall asleep after lunch. I can see the change in his facial expression. And in my mind, I say to myself, my story is triggering his trauma story, because he had just met with me a few days before in therapy and shared his own trauma experiences. So I said to myself, I need to keep an eye on him. And the moment that I finish my part, put Dr. Nedley's DVD on, he gets up and walks out. So I follow him out. And as the door closed behind me, he spins around, and now the light of the building falls on his face, and I can see that he's weeping. But the moment he recognizes me, he goes down in a crouched position, and he walks towards me, and he's mumbling something. And as he comes closer, I hear him say, "I'm sorry, David, I'm sorry. David, I'm sorry." And I say to him, "What are you sorry about?" See, I didn't click. He stands up straight in front of me. He said, "You don't realize." He said, "I ordered that strike in your center that night. I was in charge of the Asian Mafia group." Where do I meet him now? I meet him now in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, undergoing Bible studies, preparation for baptism. Isn't God amazing? He's not my enemy, he's my brother. So friends, often as we work with people with addictions, because it is so foreign to us, we often put the person and their behavior together, and we treat them as an addict. Christ had the ability to separate the two. People battling with sin knew that they were safe in the presence of Christ. But today in our modern society, it is sinners that feel unsafe in the presence of the followers of Christ. We read stories and we tell our kids stories, like the story of Zacchaeus that could not see Jesus. Why couldn't he? We tell our children they could not see Jesus because he was short. That's not what my Bible tells me. My Bible tells me that he could not see Jesus because of the crowd and that he was short. Is it possible that the attitude of the crowd had blocked him from being able to see Jesus? By the way, who is the crowd? The religious people of the day. Is it possible, friends, that we can become the blockage, blocking people from seeing Jesus? Okay, so starting up in Cabramatta, many of my clients said to me, have you used drugs? Well, I don't even drink coffee or tea. Really? So how would you ever be able to help me? Well, my friends, do I really have to jump into the fire to know that it is hot? To be able to tell you that you shouldn't jump into the fire or touch a hot stove? There's one thing that I do have, and that is a love for people and a passion to learn how and what makes people tick. So what I had done in all the years that I worked on the streets of Cabramatta was to study each person that came through our doors. And as you study people for a long enough time and you study enough people, what eventually happens is that you see a pattern forming. But before I go there, I want to go to a much more cleverer person than myself and give you a definition of addiction. And then I first want to come home to us, who don't even drink coffee or tea, and ask a question whether we might have an addiction. We would never have addictions, would we? We're never addicts. Well, hang on. Don't leave. The definition of addiction is that it is possible to divide our lives into 4 general categories. Number 1, family life. 2, social life. 3, vocational life. And 4, spiritual life. When a chemical or addictive agent interferes with the productivity, tranquility, efficiency, or well-being of any of these areas, and when we are made aware that this is happening, but still persist in using the chemical or agent, then we are addicted, at least psychologically. It is no more apparent than for a heroin addict who is starting to lose control over their life, who is starting to stop caring for themselves, to be able to see that they are addicted. I call them into my office and say, mate, why don't you allow me to help you? I can see that the addiction is taking over your life. Their response is, David, I'm not an addict. I can put this drug down at any moment. I'm just enjoying it at the moment. I will put it down tomorrow if I had to. Well, I'm noticing that your family life, you're already living on the street. Your family can't cope with your addiction. Your social life, you've become a recluse. You've given up your job. Aren't that indicators enough to show you that you have lost the ability to control this issue? I promise you, David, if tomorrow I want to, I'll be able to put it down. I am not an addict. It's my wife that's over anxious about things. She used to use it with me anyway. According to the definition, the person is psychologically addicted. Right? You clear about that? Okay. So what happens, I'm a minister, I'm planting a church every second year, a new church. I have multiple church districts. I am doing further studies in psychology. And my wife is begging me to spend time with her as well. But remember, she's a shift worker as a nurse. So, well, I've given you my roster, and I'm sorry, I can't help that, your work keeps on chopping, changing your roster. Not my problem. There's work that needs to be done. I didn't act that way, by the way. I'm making an example. But would that be an addictive behavior? There's something that I did, which I'm going to just utterly make myself vulnerable here to you today. When it came to communion Sabbath, I would not go for lunch. Not before I have visited those in hospital or those in the retirement villages that were unable to attend the communion service. I would not go for lunch before I have served them communion. But my wife, who might have been in the hospital, called out to work, I never ever even considered to take communion for her. Shame on us. So I go into a new district, friends, changing gears, look away from myself, much easier to look at others. I go into a new district. The conference have asked me to care for a congregation that is known to be the most difficult congregation in their conference. I arrive there, meet with the head elder, and in our discussion he shares with me how that he has held that position for 18 years. I said, brother, is it really safe to be the head elder of a congregation for 18 years? Oh, Pastor, I would easily give this up. Honestly, I promise you, I don't want this job. There's just no one in this congregation to take over this role. That first weekend, as I get up onto the pulpit, I look over the audience. There's about 170 people in the congregation. I see very much able men. And some of them I even recognize. People with very good standing. Strong men. I normally do not bring about change in the first year because I want to see the dynamics, what's happening. I'm just giving you some heads up how ministers operate sometimes. I want to see who is the elected leaders, who is the unofficial leaders, the real leaders in the church, because often they are different people. And after a year, we had our next nominating committee, and I promise you, God is my witness, I had nothing to do with it, but this man was voted out. Someone else was voted in. The next Sabbath, there's an entire row in the church that was empty. What's going on? Well, they might have gone on a holiday. But normally, as head elder, he would tell me when he goes on holiday. So it was days before mobile phones, so I drive out to his home. Their cars are parked outside the house, but there's no one responding to my knock. I go home, I phone. There's no message that comes up on the phone. It's still old days. So someone picks up the phone on the inside of the house. The moment they hear my voice, they put the phone down. So I drive out to the home again. The door was standing open. But the moment that my car parks, I can see the window, someone peeping through the window, and the drapes are dropped and the door is pushed shut. What's going on? I tried to make contact, eventually go to the gentleman's work, confront him at work. What's going on? Not just him and his family, but all his kids and grandkids and their spouses. 3 weeks later, I receive a phone call one Sunday night, very late. The wife of this man pleading with me, Pastor, I know it's late, but can you please quickly come to the hospital? My husband is in the emergency department. They're fighting for his life. They think that he's had a heart attack. Let's go to the next part of this definition. He says, if we get physically ill when the drug or agent is withdrawn, then we are physically addicted as well. Here's my question. Is it possible that power could be an addictive agent? Is it possible that position and status can become an addictive agent? Is it possible that, hang on now to your seats, that religiosity can become an addictive agent? Shall I go on? What about veganism? No. I'm not talking about veganism as a form of health reform where I try to live a healthier life. I'm talking about veganism as a form of attaining a higher spiritual status than others. You know what I'm saying. So please don't go back on Monday morning, phone up the health director of your conference and say, please never get this man again. He says that vegans are all addicts. That's not what I'm saying. Please note what I'm saying. It is veganism that I use as a form to try and attain a higher status than others. Right? So, friends, it's a pity that it is very small, but I'm going to take you through this. I'm going to talk you through. As I listen to thousands of people coming through our doors during that period of time as we worked in Cabramatta, I saw a pattern forming. I saw that for the majority of them, the starting point on the addictive cycle is a damaged self-worth due to a maladaptive attachment to primary caregivers. What is that? I love attachment theories. I love to study how that our sense of self is formed through the relationship with our parents. Watch a young mum who has just given birth to a little baby, who's holding a little child in her arm, and she just talks this funny mother-child language, you know, where she nearly gobbles like the baby itself, coos and ahs, and while the little one is nursing, she smiles and she pulls faces, and what does the little baby do? Does the back in return. Ask that mother to do an experiment. Ask that mum to change her facial expression. By the way, friends, when a baby is born, the distance that their eyes can focus is the distance between the mum's breast and the mum's face. It is not the issue of breastfeeding. It is the issue of holding that child in that position. That is crucial, because that is where attachment is formed. But ask that mum to change her facial expression, to look in a stern facial expression at a little child and observe what will happen. The little baby will try to change the mother's facial expression by trying to change theirs. And when the mother holds that harsh, stern facial expression, the baby will start to cry, detach, or is that the right word? And will turn the face away and start to cry. It also happens when dad walks through the door, by the way, as mum is busy nursing a child or holding the child, bottle feeding, and dad walks through the door. You know, mum is busy talking, connecting, and looking at a little baby and looking at every hair and every little fold in the ear and whatever mums do. And then dad walks through the door and mum looks up and suddenly her tone of voice changes and she barks a few commands. What happens to the baby? The baby, once again, lets go of the nipple and, pulls back. But what does the mum do? Immediately forgets about the dad, just really looks down at the little baby, and again with a change of a facial expression and a change in tone of voice, reconnects, and the baby reconnects with mum and knows that it's okay. All okay, A-okay in this world. The child has just learned one of the most important lessons in their developmental stage, and that is how to adapt to an ever-changing environment. Our children even respond in the womb. I did the experiment with my children because I couldn't believe it. I'm the only one in my household that speaks Zulu. Anyone here that speaks Zulu? My second language. And my wife doesn't speak it. I grew up amongst the Zulu nation, and my immediate siblings, they know that language. But when my wife was pregnant with our firstborn, I would often just go and lie on the bed next to her, and with my face close to her abdomen, I would sing a Zulu song. Ilanga lishoni lewanonsizwa, ilanga lishoni le komontombi, abaya bailena gutlabisa, abaya bailena gunongoma. And as I kept on singing this little song, eventually I would see my little baby starting to react. She would come alive inside my wife. She was born, she was a colic baby. We took her home, and we just couldn't get the off button. She would scream, and 3 o'clock in the morning, I've got meetings, you know, when the sun comes up. My wife is sick, she can't look after the little one. So I would lie there, I would do everything possible. And in frustration, one morning, around about 3 o'clock, I just started to hum. And suddenly she stopped. She listened. Her breathing started to become deeper, and she fell asleep. And so did I. Attachment. But what happens if there's a maladaptive attachment? When a mother is so deeply depressed that she's so discomforted with this pregnancy, this is the most awkward time for her to fall pregnant, or when there's conflict in the relationship between mum and dad, and it would have been far better for them not to have had this child coming. We know today that when a mother is pregnant with a child in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, under major stress, her body will react by releasing the stress hormone, cortisol. In the unborn child's bloodstream, the cortisol levels would be equal as in the mother's. In the unborn child's, the heightened level of cortisol will in actual fact alter the growth of the brain neurons permanently, and will affect the child in terms of the way that they would view themselves one day, will affect them in the way in which they would deal with stress, and because of those two will affect the way that they will build relationships later in life. Now, I'm sharing this not to make you feel guilty, because friends, how much control do we sometimes have over stress? Not much. So my intent is not here to cause guilt and shame in your life, but rather to give you an understanding of how sensitive we are as human beings. But a maladaptive attachment to primary caregivers is one of the areas that causes a damaged self-worth, or an inability to cope with stresses, or unresolved trauma or abuse. I've raised those issues during the sermon time this morning, so I'm not going to talk. Depression by itself, one of the identification marks of depression. When I work with someone and they talk to me about a sense of lethargy, that they've lost enjoyment in things that they used to enjoy, that they just, it's just a bore to get up in the morning. They feel as though there's something wrong with them, that they don't hold worth and value. My brain immediately goes towards the potential of depression, because this is one of the issues that is a characteristic mark of depression, a low sense of self-worth. What's very interesting is people that grieve go through exactly the same symptoms as depression, except one, and that is that in grief you do not have a lowered sense of self-worth. But when we battle with a damaged self-worth, we then become susceptible to the second point there on the right-hand side, and that is that creates emotional emptiness that poses as emotional pain. It is in this period of time that we have a search for significance, a deep yearning that others would find us significant. I planted a church just outside of Canberra. Conference invited me to come into South New South Wales conference. They asked me to plant a church there. Very soon I realized that there was youth gangs operating in Queanbeyan, and met with the police. They told me where these guys were hanging out, so I would go into the areas where they're hanging out, and I realized very quickly that two of the young people who were supposed to be in the church, Mum was in church, was actually two of the ringleaders in that youth gang. So I went in, I grabbed them, pulled them into my office, started to work with them. Once they changed, I sent them back in to bring two more. And kept on working with them and using them to work with others. We eventually broke. But I sat down with them, I said to them, guys, tell me, this cycle, how does it fit? No, we've got good self-worth. Really? Yep. No, we're all good. Look, we're the leaders of this group. Okay. Mum and Dad divorced, right? Yep. Where's Dad? Gone back to the island. When last have you seen Dad? He doesn't bother about us. Doesn't care about us. How do you feel about that? Cowboys don't cry, friends. So they start to hang around others that will give them acceptance, and they start to do things that will make them acceptable to others. And while they know that that is not the road to go, they go it anyway because their deepest desire, how did object relations theory say? Our biggest desire is for attachment, relatedness. So we will often venture into areas that we know is destructive for us, but we will stay there hoping to gain acceptance from people. By the way, what do you and I do with pain? If you've got a massive headache this afternoon, what will you do with that pain? Well, I know some of you is going to say drink lots of water. Good on you. Very good, healthy option. But some of you would pop a Panadol. The majority of us would pop a Panadol, friends. And no different to emotional pain. What this class of people have learned, that in a substance is an ability to control the emotional pain that I experience. And therefore they turn to an addictive agent to numb that emotional pain. The primary addictive agent, drug and alcohol. But what about money and food? Material possessions? What about food? Yes. We now know that the eating disorders that is rife amongst young women has a link, direct link to depression. Right? And they treat them with antidepressants and it goes better with them. But what about overeating? What about eating to just satisfy my emotional needs at that moment? To self-medicate? Alcohol is the preferred way of self-medicating when I feel down upon myself, when I feel that I just don't measure up. Most men turn to alcohol as a form of self-medication. By the way, when they feel depressed, they use alcohol. Alcohol is in actual fact a depressant, not an antidepressant. it lifts your mood for a moment, but the moment it starts to withdraw out of your system, it drops you further down than where you were before. So next time you've got to use more, or you've got to use more often, which then starts the process of the addiction to grow. No different also with food. Material things, we spoke about that this morning. Power and position. What about relationship, codependency, sex, pornography? I want to stop there at pornography for a sec. Because, friends, in the Christian church, pornography is rife. Our children start to access pornography in their teen years. By the way, while pornography is a high percentage in the males, females are not immune to that. The percentage in females is starting to rise. But why is pornography such an option? As a married man for 35 years, let me tell you, there's nothing that speaks my worth and my value as when my spouse finds me attractive enough to want to share herself with me. I'm just going to put it out there to you. Got to talk straight, friends. But in order to get it to that point, means that I need to be very careful what I say. I've got to dot my I's and cross my T's and careful for my P's and my Q's 2 days before already. And just one wrong word, just one wrong facial expression can just crash the whole maneuvering into position for that moment. I notice that you can see what I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about. A click away on a screen is a woman that looks at you, gentlemen. She's very poor. She hardly has any money to buy clothing. Therefore, she is hardly clothed. She looks at you with a look that says, I want you. I want to share myself with you. And with that scene comes self-manipulation. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to spell it out. And then follows the Big Bang, talking code language. And what follows is emptiness. A cold screen. No one to hold you, no one for you to hold. And that cold screen leads to guilt and shame and self-hatred. And you're back on the cycle, down the addictive cycle. And you go through it over and over again, hoping to get another outcome. That's the peak of stupidity, doing the same thing over and over, hoping to get a different outcome, isn't it? But that's what we do. That is what is behind the addictive nature of pornography. And what happens, friends, is that once I do it, my spiritual life declines because I can't do that and be open in my relationship with God, because I need a form of punishment so that I can feel better. And therefore I withdraw from God to self-punish. But that leads to further guilt and shame. And we're eventually caught up in a vicious vortex until, as a friend of mine was caught out by his wife, he was in the toilet and his wife heard this massive bang in the toilet. And she came running, but the door was locked. She wanted to know what's going on. But he was in pain, and therefore he had to open the door. And he unlocked the door, and there she found him with his foot stepped right through the cover of the toilet. And it's broken in this way, and as he tries to pull it out, it just cuts into his skin. She wanted to know what he was doing on the cover of the toilet, the seat cover, behind a locked door. So she peeked over the the window out into the neighbour's yard, and there she found the neighbour's wife sunbaking. She was also very poor. You see, when we battle with a damaged self-worth, that creates an emotional emptiness that poses as emotional pain. The way that we deal with pain is no different between physical and emotional. We turn to a substance to numb that pain. My heroin addict clients used to say to me, David, we're using to feel nothing. And in the beginning, I couldn't understand that. Why would you use a substance that's destroying your life if you feel nothing? It was only later that I realized that they were feeling pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, and which they just could not get away from. And heroin made them just feel normal. But with any use of addictive agent, there's always negative consequences. What should be the first there, my friend? The first thing that I lose is a sense of significance. By the way, there under number 2, emotional emptiness, that creates a search for significance. We search for that. In negative consequences, we lose that significance. I can remember bringing in one night a gentleman into our center in Cabramatta, and he's been living in the middle of winter under cardboard boxes. And as we started to work with him and we started to win his confidence, he disclosed to us that in reality that he was a medical doctor who was nearly finished with his specialization year. But he had just been caught out writing scripts and checking them out at the pharmacy under false names and injecting himself with that medication. He had started at the age of 15 to use alcohol to try and run away from the emotional pain of a marital breakdown and a father that just walked out of his life. He used his studies to prove to his father that he had worth and value. But his father never noticed it. From alcohol, he went on to harder drugs. He had the respect. He was a brilliant man, had the respect of his colleagues. All other doctors wanted to partner with him. But eventually, he lost his license to practice. He lost his home. He lost his family, his wife and kids. He lost his whole practice. He lost his colleagues. He was living on the streets of Cabramatta as a drug addict. He was being fed by the food that we gave on a daily basis. Other issues happened, criminal records, severing of tie with family and friends, loss of job and home, contracting diseases, which leads to, what's the next? Guilt and shame. So often a young lady would come into my office, and while we were alone, my office, one wall had see-through glass, which I didn't cover, so others could see us but could not hear us. She would come in and she would still whisper and say, I'm one of you. Did you hear it? And I'll whisper back, what do you mean? This is after working with him for months. And then she'll say, I'm actually one of you. I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist home. How do we treat those people? I'll put my arms around them and say, welcome home. Appropriately putting my arms around them, friends. From guilt and shame leads to self-hatred. Self-hatred further damages the self-worth. The greater the damaged self-worth, the greater the emotional pain. The greater the emotional pain, the greater the need for addictive agent. You can see where I'm heading. Into a vicious vortex where they are pulled in to the point where there's only one thing left to do, to end their life. What is the way out? In the National Harm Minimization Framework, you deal with the bottom two areas of that cycle. But as with depression, I prefer not to deal with symptoms, but deal with causative issues. What is the causative issues? The first two. And Professor Robert Grant concurs with that. He says that the only way that this group of people can be helped is if someone is willing to step into the life of such a person. And I want to suggest to you that no government agency can really provide that. This is where I believe that the Christian church has to become involved. By the way, there's an entire chapter in the book Ministry of Healing. I don't know whether you know that book. If you don't know that book, my friends, I want to recommend to you to get that book. The author is Ellen White. A chapter, I think it's chapter 11, with the title, Working for the Intemperate. In other words, a more modern translation would be Working for the Addict. There's a 12-step program. If you would search for it, it's there. She says that this is a class of people that should never have to come to the point where they would say that no one cares about me. She said that in every city there needs to be a place where this class of people should be helped. Tell me, right across the whole of Australia, how many places do we have as a church that does that? None. Just a few weeks ago, I shared this last night, just very briefly for those that were here. Just a few weeks ago, I received a phone call from an Adventist medical doctor who's been approached, who received a phone call from a drug rehabilitation facility. The CEO said, our program has failed. We are inviting the Adventists to take over our therapeutic program. He picked up the phone and says, David, I don't know what to do, but I know that you've worked in that field for many years. Will you come and advise us, train up a team so that we can respond to this need? Professor Robert Grant, my friend, says that there needs to be those two anchors that I referred to this morning. That first anchor is you, that cares with the compassion and the heart of Christ, that is willing to hear their story. Each one of us here this afternoon has a story to share. Am I right? And one of our greatest needs is to share that story, to have a safe enough environment where someone will properly hear my story with no judgment. Professor Robert Grant says that as that person is willing to engage and confront and guide, but not control that person's life, it opens up the capacity for the person to turn to the greater power that will bring the transition in their life. You see, my friends, the issues that has led us down the path towards searching for addictive agent is still there. It is just purely numb. That medical doctors still had to face exactly the same issues that started him off at the age of 15 when he started to drink alcohol. He has to face now exactly the same issues that has been compounded through the years. None of it has gone away. But he needs an environment where it's safe enough to open up, to be able to share it. We can send them down to a detox unit, which we've done. A detox unit will detoxify them, but will leave their brain chemicals in shambles. Why? Because the addictive nature of the drugs that they have used has altered the brain chemicals. Now they have to face the world as well as the same psychopathology that they were trying to run away from by the use of drugs with no drugs. And within a week, it's just become too much and they're right back where they are. Because we deal with symptoms, not with causative issues. Once we start to deal with causative issues in a framework of support, it is Augustine that says that number 2, the emotional emptiness there that poses as emotional pain is in reality a God-formed vacuum that God has placed in each one's life. It is in reality a desire for God, which see it that way because our whole society is as a focus away from God. We try to fill it with all other stuff. You see, if I can get the nicest looking girl on my side, I will have the respect of all my peers as I walk down the street, says a young man. If I can have that fastest car in town, everyone will respect me. If I can make my first million by the age of 40, I've still got a few months to go. Don't believe me, do you? I wonder why. Then at least people will respect me. We grab for things, none of it, even when we attain those things, the void, that emptiness will still be there. Because Augustine says it is a God-formed vacuum. It is only God that can satisfy. The one that designed us to be in communion with Him. But how do you do that? And I'm seeing some therapists here in my audience. How do you do it? As therapists, we are trained that you are not allowed to. Except if they asked for it. My friends, I'm not talking about Adventism. Adventism, by the way, can be one of the addictive agents. A church, a denomination doesn't set us free. It is the person of Jesus Christ that does. But that person needs to see Jesus reflected through my life. I want to tell you about Sally, not a real name. Sally was brought into our center at the point where she tried to commit suicide. Sally has been a drug addict since her teen years. She was a hard woman, a strong woman. That amount of drugs that she was using would kill an ox. She would, she would not mix up her drugs in a little teaspoon. She would mix it up in a soup ladle. She would even add vodka to it so that it would give her more impetus, give it more oomph. She was brought in at the point where she tried to commit suicide, and they put it down. My staff said to me, "David, you deal with this one. We don't know how to deal with her." So we sat down with her. I wanted to know, because with the tough cases, friends, I want God in the process. But I want to do it very respectfully. So I said to Sally, Sally, do you believe in a high power? Well, did she not explode? She had, all this additive words, started with F's and D's, and I can't repeat them this afternoon. And she said, never ever talk to me about him. God is no different to my father that sexually abused me from the age of 6. So I called my staff together. I said to them, never talk about God. Just live him through your attitude towards Sally. 3 months down the line, Sally one day knocked on my door. I motioned her to come in. She came and she sat down. She said to me, David, I think that the face of God has changed in my mind. I said, what? We haven't spoken about God to her. She said, I think that God must look like the people that work in this place. Please, will you introduce me to the God that makes your team different? We spent a bit of time together. I went on holiday. It was Christmas time. My staff continued. We operated right through Christmas. Christmas was a great celebration for our clients. We would leave our families or even invite our families as volunteer teams, and we would gather on that day with drug addicts, and we would have the best Christmas party with no drugs, no alcohol, nothing. And we would just spend the day, and it would just blow their mind. Why would anyone spend that day with them? Anyway, I just had to go away. Remember, I'm a workaholic. I need to break that pattern, so I went away. And I was away about for a week when my phone rang, and it was one of my staff saying to me, David, Sally had a major experience last night, and she wants to share it with you. Are you still in town? Could you come down? So I went down to Cabramatta. I was leaving the following day. I met with Sally. She shared how that she surrendered her life that previous night to God. She had woken up in the middle of the night in the squad, a broken, dilapidated home where the prostitutes were doing the work and sleeping. And it was a mess. The stench was horrible when she woke up. The girls were doing their business. And she said she just fled out of that broken down home. She laid down on the green lawn outside, and she just lay there looking up at the stars, talking to God. And she said she fell asleep. And she woke up that morning with not a single withdrawal symptom. A miracle. For someone with that volume of drugs, withdrawal is violent. She said to me, David, God has set me free. And I promise God that I will never defile my body again. My body from this day forward belongs to Him. I was away for 2 weeks. When I came back, I received the devastating news. Sally was in prison. That's enough to put people back onto drugs. I had access to all the prisons in New South Wales, so I immediately took my certificate, went to the prison, got access to go in, and they called Sally for me. And I guess she could have seen the concern on my face, and she smiled with this broad smile. And she reached out behind her back, and she pulled out the Bible from under her jumper that we'd given her. And she said, David, don't worry about me. I'm in the place where God wants me to be. Here I am meeting and working with women that I used to prostitute with. I'm meeting with other women that I used to do drugs with. But here I'm sharing with them the love of Jesus that has set me free. What happened that she landed up in prison? Well, that day as I left, she had made a decision that her body belongs to God, that she'll never again defile it. So she never returned to the methadone clinic. So because she jumped ship and didn't continue her methadone clinic visit, the clinic eventually ordered or sent a report to the magistrate that had given her the option 2 years before, methadone or prison. At that point, she had chosen methadone. So she was brought before the same magistrate, and he said, 2 years ago, I gave you the choice. What do you plea now? She said, Your Honor, I've met Jesus. He said, I don't care if you've met the Queen of England. The option is methadone or prison. He said, Your Honor, with all respect to the court, I've given my body to Christ, and I will never defile it again. I choose prison. Sally, a drug addict, had met Jesus and became a discipler of Jesus, informing others of the love and the grace of Jesus Christ. Friends, at Big Camp this year, in our own tent, a gentleman was managing the sound in a big tent in our conference. I knew him very well. Why? He used to be one of my clients in Cabramatta, with 2 brothels, a drug dealer, a drug user, but who surrendered his life to Jesus, is currently serving as an elder in one of your churches in your conference. The transformation is mind-blowing when God becomes the agent that works through you to transform these lives. I hope that this model will help you because, my friends, once we create an environment to deal with the damaged self-worth issues, focus on the causative issues, and then create an environment in which the person can have a smaller anchor that reflects the attitude of the greater anchor, and they can come to the point where they meet that greater anchor in their life. The change is rapid. Let me just say this in closing. While they are still blaming others for where they're at in their life, they're not ready for change. When they come to that point where they say, you know, David, I've had a raw life as a child, but I guess it is up to me what I'm going to do from this moment forward. Then I know they're just minutes away from change.